What's the most NSFW thing you experienced in a workplace? Female coworker walks into my office, closes the door, and exposes her breast. Said she wanted to show me her dolphin tattoo. 6 months later, at an office team build, the facilitator asked who has tattoos, and a good story. In front of everyone, she said, "I have a tattoo in a private place, and only he, me, has seen it." A part of me died in that team build. Story 2. As a pharmacy intern, I was doing some med recs inpatient. I knocked on a door, and the patient said, "Come in." As I opened the door, there was an old man in his 70s with his robe completely open, swinging his thing around like a windmill. When he saw me, a male, walk in, he immediately hopped into bed and pretended nothing happened. "Did my consult," reported him to the floor nurse. Story 3. When I was 17, a girl came through the Taco Bell drive-thru at like 2 in the morning begging me to give her a free Baja Blast, and then said she would show me her thing if I got her a Baja Blast. She got the Baja Blast. Story 4. I had a bookkeeper. She did an okay job, if a little lazy, and she was a little rough around the edges. It was lunch, and just about everyone was out, and my receptionist was running errands. My office was just off the lobby. I hear the ping of the elevator, the door open, and 2 sets of footsteps out in the lobby. So I get up and find out who's just come in. It's 2 nicely dressed folks from the airport Holiday Inn holding a couple of folders. I ask if I can help them, and they ask for Kathy. Upon learning that she was at lunch, one of them said, "Well, can I leave this with you? Your company has been such good customers of ours that we wanted to offer you a group discount." I thanked them and returned more than a little confused to my office. Let me be clear. I've never booked a room at the airport Holiday Inn, and I wouldn't put my worst enemy in the airport Holiday Inn. It's a seedy flophouse in a bad neighborhood. It dawns on me. Kathy was using her corporate Amex card to book a room, then paying cash for it. That is literally the only way they could have wound up in my lobby with the frequent stay plan. Kathy returns from lunch, and I call her into my office and report the encounter. Huh, weird. Imagine that. With that, she takes the folders and leaves. About a month after that, I give her the boot for getting really lazy and missing some stuff on the financials. It had been an ongoing issue, but no worries. My wife is a CPA who was keeping an eye on the books. When my wife and I are trying to figure out the next move, we are in Kathy's cubicle, going through things, and I noticed the message light on her extension practically strobing. Back in the day, that's how you knew you had a lot of messages. So we listened, and it was guy after guy calling her to book an appointment, giving her flight numbers et al. I had a call girl for my bookkeeper and didn't even know it. Story 5, it was 99, and I was working in a music store in the mall. It was 9:55, and we'd already done the thing where we pull the gate half down to signify that the store is about to close. A man was standing at the back, looking at DVDs. My boss asked me to go inform him that he needed to make his final selection and leave the store as we were closing. As I approached him, I noticed he was fixated on the recent addition to our DVD wall, the Playboy home video section. I walked up and said, "Excuse me, sir." The man turned around, junk in hand, gave it a couple more gits in my direction, then took off running through the store with his junk out. He ducked and ran under the gate and out into the mall. My manager was laughing his head off. I suspect he knew exactly what that man was doing. Story 6. If you count EMs, there was an emergency once where a lady had called in stuck in her bathtub. Showed up, it was a regular caller and people knew the score. Small, spindly recruit lass was on the job, and we had to get in the bathroom window to limit damage and breaking the front door. We could hear this lady wasn't dying. Put up a ladder, recruit gets in, stands up and turns to this old lady. The moment she looked at her, this old lady's face drops like a sack of bricks and just says, "But you're a girl," stands up out of the bath in frustration, and straight up walks her out of the house, to the laughs and jeers of everyone outside, who knew exactly what was going to happen. Story 7. Worked at an amusement park. We had a big, spinning ride where it was like 2 people per cabin, and the cabins chased each other, so not like the Gravitron or anything. We had a worker go out to check on something, but the ride was in motion and had just tipped to alter its orbit. Anyhow, the guy took a cabin to the head. The body lay convulsing for a few seconds, if I recall, while parents shielded the eyes of their kids. People turned away in disgust. What I remember being especially traumatizing is when patrons got off the ride. They had no idea why it was stopped halfway through and were upset at the operator. Little did they know. At least they didn't have to see what we did. No amount of scrubbing will ever relieve me of what I saw that day, and that was maybe 25 years ago. Story 8. Worked nights in a hospital as a respiratory therapist. Couldn't find one of the therapists and found him in the office where the hyperbaric chamber was. This was a mono-place chamber, meaning big enough for one person on a gurney. There he was, on the gurney, in the chamber, with an ear nurse on top of him. Should have been a sign. If it's a rockin', don't bother knockin'. I quickly left so they could finish their therapy session. Story 9. Had a major client presentation on a Monday morning. Everybody was there, working Sunday night to make sure nothing went wrong. It did. Programming lead comes in. His PC won't boot. Non-bootable device. All his code is on that PC, the only copy of the build they need in the morning. The IT staff is all on a ticket system, and there is nobody to even look at it. Everybody gathers in the boss lady's office and tries to brainstorm what to do. Account managers, business analysts, programmers, operations, data center, somebody from every group. Drive recovery software? But nobody wants to pay for it and deal with getting paid back. Boss lady on her own begins surfing to Juarez sites. Pirated software. Actual pirated software. Not just a lame streamer using the handle. Looking for free options. Immediately adult film pop-ups flood her giant screen. The whole office is exposed to pink flesh moving and shaking and doing fairly impressive things that would get any of us fired if it wasn't happening in the boss's office in front of like 10 witnesses, men and women. It took boss lady about 30 seconds to close all the windows. Nobody said anything. Plan B was to take another look at the down PC. Eventually, somebody realizes the programmer had left a floppy in the drive and the BIOS was not set to do anything else if the floppy drive didn't boot. Remove diskette. PC was fine. Data and code safe. Client rolled in, took the work we did for review, and gave term notice a week later. We did not save the account. They got us to do the big update for free. Loss of that client killed that whole office. Story 10. So, much was more fun than the other. I got called in early for morning shift. 2:30 a.m. clocked in for some samples that needed quick turnaround and long run time. The lab was usually closed from 10 p.m. till 4 a.m., so those of us routinely took early call-out, had a key, unlocked the door, went to reset the security via code, and realized it was already off. Hailing often if night shift figured they'd be early call, no biggie. Started to make my way to lab, which was the back 2-3 of the building, with front 1/3 being officers and conference room. Heard sounds coming from the left-hand side, where the boss office was, which was weird, because she was never there late. Came around the corner and went to stick my head because I saw her door open. Stood when I realized they're ducking the district manager's nasty cock. He was gross, smoked and drank for years, missing half of his teeth, smelled like you left a bottle of beer open in your boot in Louisiana summer. Off to the side, the HR manager was observing while playing the violin, and she was a massive and surprisingly flexible black lady that had always been polite. But I realized I want taking this issue to HR. I noped the duck out and headed back to the lab as quietly as I could and put my headphones back in. Found a new job a month later. Better off the two was I accidentally found a coworker's pleasure themselves, and he was quite hot, volleyball player, and in good shape. We wound up on night shift together in the lab in the section that was pretty quiet. He was complaining about being bored, and I made some off-the-cuff joke about volleyball and referenced something he said in the video. He blushes and realizes I've seen it and asked what I thought. This is story 11. When I worked in a hotel, an extremely hot dude who just came back from a military tour in the ME came there to off himself because he found out his wife was cheating on him with his neighbor while he was gone and was taking his daughter and moving away. He got blackout drunk and told me he wanted to do BJ before he passed and get ducked. I was like, sure, he loved it. He offered me like $5K to go home with him, and I said, I'm no. Then he thanked me and he didn't want to pass anymore. It's a weird story. But yeah, he was hot too. Like 10-10 hot. I'm not ugly, but he was 100% out of my league. He kind of looked like Channing Tatum or whatever. Story 12. Caught the married big boss, ducked the married boss, my boss, after being punished, and moved to third shift. They forgot they moved me to that shift, and I was running 45 mins late that day. I got a nice raise and told that I could decide which shift I wanted to work. Story 13. I work in tech, and at the time myself, a coworker, a manager, and our director were all having a kid at the same time. The staff threw us a combined baby shower that was incredibly nice. Catering from a nice Mediterranean place, we each received these very fancy, elaborate diaper cakes, basically just a bunch of diapers designed to look like a cake, and each of us got like a $300 Amazon gift card, probably like 50 plus people there, along with our SR director at the time. We're in this huge conference room with a large screen. We had a video made for us from a team that we work with frequently. Very cool, congratulating us all on our upcoming babies. Then, one of the managers, a direct report of the director being showered, says he has another video for us and projects his phone on the big screen. Turns it on, and it's adult video. The whole room is dead quiet. My brain took a few seconds to catch up to what my eyes were seeing. Rest of the room has the same reaction. We're all looking at each other like WTF is going, probably 5S pass, and the whole room just erupts in laughter. The guy playing the video looked like a tomato. He was so red. The craziest part, zero consequences. The guy that played the vid not only still works there, but was promoted to senior manager like a year or two later. It's ducking wild. Story 14. I have two. One I was on the wrong end of. My senior year, I worked for an after-school program at the elementary school next to my high school. There were 2 teachers and the 4 of us seniors. I stayed late and helped the lead teacher clean up the cafeteria where we were based. And when I went to put a couple boxes in the lounge space we had, I noticed that she was in the room stretching. And I was 18, hormonally on 1,000, and feeling bold. I flirted aggressively at that, and she reciprocated. We were absolutely hugged up and had progressed to some near filth. I had her on the couch, and it was getting real good. Then one of the girls I work with walked in, sees us, does a little yell, points, and then wheels and leaves. To her credit, she didn't snitch. She also made sure to barely speak to me at all at work. And at school, she tried very hard to get her friends to ostracize me. Oh well. As for me witnessing, I went to the break room before starting work one evening at a store that I worked at for a bit in college. I see one of my managers do BJ. She was absolutely due BJ another manager. Neither of them single and not married to each other. I did a double take, turned and left. Both of them spoke to me separately about it and asked if I would say anything, and I said I wouldn't. Both of them left inside a year. One was fired for a relationship with a subordinate, and the other quit to take a new job. I'm still impressed with her ability to hide her BJ skills, TBH. Story 15 was working in a supermarket, stocking shelves, and one of the butchers came up to me and was casually wiping his hands on a towel and said, "Bobby hit his fingers." I said, "Bobby hit his finger." He said, "No, he lost his fingers." I thought crap and went to see what was going on. Ambulance was called. He ended up in a bad place. He was hooked on pain meds, then alcohol. Then his wife left him. He got a payday, but his life and body, right hand, was irreparably damaged. Story 16. A coworker and I got bored during a break. She and I did it in her car since it was further from the building. We both walked back in and were freaked out by what we had just done. We never spoke to each other again, and I quit 2 days later. Story 17. As a manager at a factory. One guy snuck in an addict escort and an air mattress into a factory you have to badge in to get in and has security guards. This place has miles of underground tunnels and hidden offices. He set up shop in there. Long, unbelievable story. She was living there for a few weeks. Once a girl ducked in the bathroom. That was super ducked up, and I didn't think that ever happened. Once 2 girls were ducking in the bathroom, but had a falling out, so myself, HR, and the union had one of them decide to tell us in graphic details. I think the HR lady almost fainted. Then she tried to tell us in detail everyone she had ever had sex with at work. They called her the door because everyone got a turn. The other was called bicycle because everyone got a ride. Now mind you, as a manager, I have to put a stop to that sort of talk too. But she wasn't happy just telling us, so she let pretty much everyone else know. Had a dude make a special area for him to pleasure himself. IDKY, Ducking Circus Story 18. My mom used to date a guy that owned a glass install business. I ended up working for him part-time during a few summers. He had on of those rivet guns powered by gunpowder charge. Thing was old and jank as duck, and he kept it in a tool bag versus in its case. He asked for it, I grabbed it, not to think about hand placement. I pulled the trigger, rivet shot past his head. Safety was on, just didn't work anymore. And he didn't realize he put it in the bag loaded. Almost hit him. Ranks pretty high on my list. He also bought a replacement that day. Story 19. I was a security supervisor at a local casino resort. I was working hotel one night, and we got a couple noise complaints from a room. The complaints were pretty clear. It was a couple having a good time. Finally, after complaint number 3, it's time for me to get involved, and I knock on the door. It opens, and I am greeted by a male patron covering his junk with one of those tragically thin throw pillows. In the back, I can see girl. I simply say, "Excuse me, sir, we've had multiple noise complaints from the rooms around you. Nothing wrong with you guys having a good time." "You are having a good time, right?" she shouts from the bed. "I'm okay." And the feet give a little wiggle. The guy looks at her, then looks at me and says, "Man, I'm trying, but you know how women get. What else can I do?" To which myself, the officer I was with, and the tribal police officer a short ways down the hall all kind of snorted. I said, "No problem. Just keep it quiet if you're going to carry on. Some people are trying to sleep." I gave him a friendly smile, and he nodded and closed the door. I heard a spank and the continuation of now blessedly quieter lovemaking, and that was the last I heard of them the rest of the night. I miss that job sometimes. Story 20. When I was in college, I was a pizza delivery driver. I had 2 experiences I can remember right off the bat. One, I delivered to this seedy motel in town. Guy comes to the door only wearing a towel. I glance behind him, and there's this big-tittied lady laying across the bed. She waves at me and says, "Hey baby, how you doing?" Nothing weird happened after that. They didn't invite me in or anything, but definitely was the first thing I mentioned when I got back to the store. 2, I got a delivery to one of the local high school teacher. She was the honors English teacher, and she was a known lush. I get to the house, and she answers the door 3 sheets to the wind, wearing nothing but a see-through robe. And what's even better is you can hear a bunch of people partying it up in another room somewhere. My girlfriend at the time was taking one of her classes, and she wouldn't believe me when I told her what I'd seen. Story 21. I had a very flamboyant bartender touch my junk on my third or fourth day. My chef gave me a hug, and we jokingly went to kiss each other at the end of the night, and everyone thought it was gross, so we ended up kissing just to freak them out. We're both straight, and his wife thought it was hilarious. My now chef will slap my back, and I stick my butt out for him to slap it next, and he gets super uncomfortable every time. Years ago, I had a coworker squeeze by me, rubbed up against mine, and in front of everyone, he goes, "Well, it looks like we're butt buddies now." I had a chef's aunt come from Mexico to work with us for the summer, and she had a huge crush on me. One day, some coworker locked the aunt and I in the walk-in, and she kissed me. She was almost twice my age, and it was really awkward because of the language barrier. I wasn't there for this one, but at one of my jobs, a coworker walked into the bathroom to find the dishwasher bathing himself with a mop because his water was shut off. You see a lot of crap in the restaurant industry, story 22. This was a good one. I worked for an electronics recycle company. Outshift started normally at 7:30 a.m. Around 9:30 a.m. or so, I need to use the restroom. There's only two in the building, one in the warehouse and one in the office. After my time on the throne, I go to wash my hands and instantly see a long cylindrical plastic container with a transparent liquid next to the hand soap. I can tell immediately it's off and pick it up. Safe to use on silicone. I took a picture because who the hell does that and forgets their formulated cleaner on the sink? Of course, I went around and showed everyone I figured would get a kick out of it. It had disappeared by the time lunch hit at noon. Story 23. When I worked in a nursing home kitchen, the cook's niece took a liking to me and was really bad at hiding it, always staring at me, asking for long hugs. Eventually, I caved in once I had the opportunity and asked if she wanted to see the 8th floor. It was COVID, so the 8th floor was out of commission, unsecure, and ripe with fresh beds. She was eager to agree and followed me into the elevator. We made out, and I carried her out from the elevator into the closest room. We did it, and we went back to work like nothing happened. For weeks after that, we'd duck anywhere we had the chance. The time in between tray line and cleanup, mid-shift in the canteen behind the counter, behind the dining hall stage, the utility closet behind the dining hall stage after work. Almost in the courtyard, but someone was cleaning the dining hall that was beside the courtyard. Story 24. I was on the company bus heading to work early in the morning, half asleep, trying to make the most of the commute time before work. Then suddenly a notification rang on several people's phones, including mine. I unlocked my phone and saw it was a message in the WhatsApp commuters group, reason why everybody else's phones rang as well. I opened the group chat and I saw a dirty video. It was one of the female coworkers that sent it and was intended for her, so she was on the bus. Mind that this was before there was a feature to delete the message for all in the group. She then sent another message asking everybody to not see the video and delete it from their phone. It was not difficult to find out who it was. She got off the bus and her face was red like a tomato. I deleted the videos and messages. It was the topic of conversation for the next couple of days. Story 25. I did not see this at work, but someone did. In Toledo, I used to go to this club frequently called Frankie's. The men's room in the club had one urinal and one toilet that did not have a stall, no lock on the door, and it opened right to the main room in the club. One night I start getting bubble gut while there. I had been drinking and could not drive. My DD was hitting on some ladies, so I came up with a creative idea to go to the trucking dock at the Kroger across the street. Found a stack of pallets and let it rip, using my underwear as teep. 2 weeks later, it happens again. I go back to the scene of the original crime. 10 hours later, I tell this story to another Toledoan, and guess what? He's done the same thing. It apparently was not that unique of an idea. Story 26. As a guy, I was harassed by a female. She had a habit of coming into my office in the morning and telling me about her dates, flings, etc. She showed me an obscene video, all unprompted. I was engaged at the time, now married. She also kept saying I had big junk energy. The first time it happened, it was funny, but she wouldn't stop. I had to sit her down and calmly explain how her behavior is harassment. She stopped immediately and apologized, and that was the end of it. A previous job in my 20s, I walked in on my boss watching adult film. His computer screen faces the door, so his back was to me. I immediately looked down at the documents I was carrying and acted as if I was talking the whole time while studying my notes. He owned the company. Story 27, safety-wise, saw a guy hop on a sit-down forklift. No helmet, no safety vest, didn't do his seatbelt. I was sure we were all going to die. Sex-wise, got invited to group sex, a coworker in the lunchroom on a weekend shift. Thought they were all joking, but not. She waved me over, but I passed. She ended up pregnant and quit. I don't know if she ever found out who the father was. Story 28. I ran a bar in downtown Los Angeles in the early 2000s, and one of my bartenders was a Marilyn Chambers came and hung out for a bit. I had gained a little weight at that time, and that specific night when I was bending down to pick up some bottles for requisition, I split my suit pants, and it was a time I wasn't choosing to wear underwear, and Marilyn chambered her finger, you know. I was young and it was novel and it was shocking, but I don't know. I don't think young people understand when we say it was a different time. It wasn't that it was acceptable. It is that we just rolled with it naturally without understanding it should be different. Story 29. I was working late. We were young and had only one car, so my wife came to pick me up and hung out a bit while I was finishing up. The small professional office complex was empty except for us, so we made an attempt at office sex. I heard the front door bolt unlock and the door open. Only my fly was down at that point. So I zipped it and headed out of the back office. I shared with two other newbies to see who was there. It was one of the partners who was passing by, saw a light still on, and stopped to check it out. As I talked to him, my wife, who he hadn't yet met, bounced out of the back office looking and acting exactly like you'd expect someone who just narrowly avoided getting spotted having sex would act. To this day, I'm convinced he knew what was up. Story 30. I used to work at a slaughter shed, and the waste chute broke down, so we stood on pallets that got lifted up with a forklift so we could empty rubbish bins directly into the back of the waste truck. Story 31. Where to start? I've worked in Hollywood north of 20 years. I've seen some crap, not at my current employer. Lots of subsentences. A woman dropping her shorts and lifting her shirt and saying, "Look at me," duck in dark rooms. More than once. A guy hitting another in the head. Didn't even get fired. Guy who got hit was okay. Crap smeared all over bathroom walls a few times. To my knowledge, we never found out who. Endless amounts of harassment. Generally meant in jest and taken that way. One heart attack. He lived a few more years after. That was scary. Accidental hot photos on a phone one time. She was scrolling through to show me something, and surprise, we laughed it off. No harm, no foul. Story 32. While in school, I worked at a casino where I was a count team member. Our job was to collect and count money from 1/3 of the slot machines on a daily basis. Prior to start of the drop, collecting and swapping cash boxes from slot machines. While I was in the staging area, there was what I assume was a lady of the evening sitting at a slot machine. I told her she would have to briefly move in order for my coworkers and I to access and swap out the cash boxes. While wearing a short dress, she pivoted in the chair, smiled, and spread her legs. She laughed at my surprised reaction and walked away. Story 33. I don't even know how to explain this, but I'll try. Let me preface this with saying, I know two of my coworkers were having an affair with each other. They flat out told me when we were at lunch one day. Long story short, they were both freaks and loved to talk about it. So we were all in a department meeting, and I happened to look over at those two, and she handed a paper cup with a lid, which my company provided for their Starbucks machines, and I saw the man take a drink and looked shocked. I didn't think much of it, but at our next lunch outing, they told me what they did. The woman took a cup to the bathroom, and I think you can figure out the rest. I literally told them to stop telling me things. Story 34. I'm an LMT. I've only been working as one for about 6 months. A patient told me she needed an extra breast pillow because she has implants. The whole session we were kind of talking about her cosmetic surgeries, and she told me that her breasts only have scars underneath. I said, "Really? Oh, wow. You had a good surgeon." Then she said, "Yeah, I'll show you when we're done." I tried to avoid that at the end of the session and left the room after a quick goodbye. She said no, wait, and called me back in. She showed me and jiggled them a little too. I tried my best to remain professional, but she just seemed so eager to show me. I'm a girl, BTW. Story 35. I turned a corner in the back of the store I work at and saw a woman, pants she wore around her ankles, attempting to try on a pair of pants from the store. We don't have a fitting room. When she saw me, she just laughed and said, "You caught me. I just wanted to make sure these fit, and I thought I could do it before someone came all the way back here." To this day, I'm still not sure if she was attempting to steal them or genuinely just really needed to know if they fit. But either way, I informed her that there was a camera in the corner that could see her. She got really embarrassed and put her normal pants back on. Story 36. Was working at Acme in the deli/seafood department years ago. One of my coworkers was a friend of mine, and the gorgeous. One night we were in the back of the deli, and for some reason she mentioned to me that she could deep BJ. I told her I didn't believe her, and that she would have to prove it. She told me she would after my shift. My shift ended, we went into the cooler of the deli, and she damn well proved to me that she could do it. Story 37. Delivery driver. Had a woman that would order things from Fredericks of Hollywood. She would always answer the door wearing nothing but see-through lingerie. Story 38. I'm a heating and air conditioning service guy. I used to work in the college area of town. I had quite a few women answer the door wearing sheer tops, lingerie, etc., showing off everything they had. We were installing new equipment in a woman's house one time, and she had on a very thin white top and no bra. We were talking, and she went to the bedroom and changed into a completely see-through black top and asked me to help her open the blinds so I could get a better look at her. I never did anything with any of them, but it made the day a lot better, I must say. Story 39. Started to go on breaks with a girl who loved to give me BJ. We would go up a ladder in the garage area to the roof of the building on break where she did it. Did this many times, then would go back to our respective classrooms and carry on. Another job was a bartender, and a few times a friend's wife would come up during the evening while open. I'd sneak out to her in my car, and she'd beach me in the parking lot, then head back in behind the bar. I think they had an open marriage, but still feel bad about that. Story 40, working in a pub. One lunch shift when one of the evening bar staff came in with his girlfriend and asked to show her around where he works. 15 minutes later, and they were still in the beer cellar, so I went to check. As I walked in on them, he spotted me, pulled out and left her on her back. Tucking himself away, he stated he'd finished and left, leaving her trying to cover herself up. He carried on seeing her for a while after, but she never came back in the pub. Story 41. I worked at a hardware store. I had a gay coworker, and at the time didn't consider myself gay. I went upstairs for my break, and he was complaining to our coworker about his boyfriend. He would flirt with me while we were working, and I started to find him attractive. One time when we were in the break room, he was talking about BJ and said that if I ever wanted one, I could have one. We both got one from each other a few days later in the warehouse closet. A few days later, his boyfriend visited the store, so I put in my 2 weeks story 42. I dumped a pot of boiling water on myself while I was trying to drain pasta for an order. Well, it actually made it into the crafty strainer we have and backsplashed back at me. Had varying degrees of burns, but mostly second and third. I then ripped my shorts off in the middle of the kitchen. Didn't leave work, but I did get wasted to ease the excruciating pain. I have a 6x7 scar and strips from how my shorts were bunched together in the hem. Story 43. I had to chase down a sped student in the busy street as a cafeteria worker. He is a runner, and the principal, teacher, and nurse went after him, but he was fast and they were old. So I took the opportunity to show off my running skills. I caught up to him and held on to him until they came to get him. The principal was impressed, but my direct supervisor told me not to do that again. I was literally trying to save the kid's life, but okay. Another time at another school, the principal took off in a car, so IDK if that's how they're usually handled. Story 44. Back in 2004, I got a BJ at my desk in the lab I worked in after hours, and about 20 minutes later, again on the VPS sofa in his office. After I separated from my ex-wife in 2017, I had sex all over the office I worked at. The owner of the company had told me it was okay for me to bring girls back to the office to duck since I was living with my parents. Not a desk or office or sofa that was safe. I had the decency to wipe down most of the desk. The owners I didn't. I'm pretty sure he was into it. Story 45. Back in 2000, I was working at a pop-up toy store in an abandoned bank in the parking lot of a dying mall. Me and my buddy went up to the roof to smoke and noticed a car parked in back of the building and could plainly see a couple going at it in the passenger seat. Being doofuses, we started dropping small pebbles and crap from the roof. Story 46. Security guard got caught on camera do dirty stuff. It was in broad daylight on a weekday in a guard shack with big windows. He was fired immediately. Yes, he knew the camera was there. He panicked when my supervisor let him know that the camera was working. He thought it wasn't for some reason. Story 47. A guy jumped off the 14th or 16th floor of the hotel I worked at. He landed on the roof of the building next to it, which was maybe 3 floors up. So he fell 12 floors and splat. I quite literally splat on that secondary roof. He wasn't noticed until after having spent hours, like a whole 12 to 13 hours, baking on an uncovered, no-shade hot roof with the summer sun directly on him. That was fun to have to call 911 to come get and clean up the roof. Story 48. I used to work for a company that sold tickets for film festival. Not exclusively. They sold tickets for a lot of things. It just happened to be GLFF season. Somehow at the office, the subject of Simon Rex came up, and the office unanimously agreed that we wanted to watch his film. None of the computers at the office could access the internet, and this was before smartphone. I was ordered to drive home and fetch my laptop so we could watch his films together as a team. We did, and I was pretty impressed. Story 49. A couple hot encounters in the walk-in freezer of a Mexican restaurant I worked. Once an encounter in an accounting office. One encounter on my desk when managing an adult club. Story 50. In the late 80s, I worked at a small market TV station in Arizona. I had to be at work at 4 a.m. to record a movie that we would play later that day. The master control operator, the person who put the station on the air, yes, this was the days before all-night infomercials, would come in 4:30 a.m., put the station on the air at 5 o'clock with an hour program and disappear into the newsroom edit bays to watch adult movies he brought from home. We were the only 2 people in that station until about 6 o'clock. Story 51. I guess I can't call this NSFW because it was literally part of the job. But I spent years as a counter guy at a tattoo shop. In that time, I saw all manner piercings performed. But the real kicker was a gentleman who got a large, solid red bullseye target tattooed on and around his, The shop was a fully open floor plan, and the only thing covering that area was a small privacy divider. It didn't really leave much to the imagination. Story 52. Construction worker. Here, not a big job site, so it had a self-erecting crane, the type the operator controls from a handheld controller and walks around site. Well, the crane operator this time was a woman. Cool. Always nice to see women have the balls to get into construction. Well, I guess her motivation was to walk around and meet as many guys as possible because she was offering fun times, and by offer, I mean her words were something like, "All right, who wants a BJ in the portacraptor before the day gets going, eh?" Story 53. Worked at a hotel and a hostel where I also slept. You don't know how weird it is to hear people have sex and then check them out the next day. I would say get a room, but they did Story 54. I was on sentry duty in Iraq in a guard tower. Car parked underneath it. Couple it, start having sex. Like a good soldier, I immediately think it's a distraction, but there's absolutely nothing else around. Wait for them to finish, then let off a rocket flare. Car takes off at speed. Story 55. Back at my old job, a couple of coworkers got way too flirty during a late shift. At first, it was just harmless jokes. Then people started noticing they'd disappear at the same time for smoke breaks that lasted a little too long. You can already guess where this is going. One night, they didn't even try to hide it. Walked right out of the supply room looking disheveled. The rest of us were just standing there, pretending not to see, but you could feel the secondhand awkwardness. Story 56. In high school in the 90s, I worked at a Super Crown Books and a Barnes & Noble at different times. At BN, I would regularly have to clean crap off the walls of both the men's and women's bathroom. Suo Air Crown, since the adult mags were kept out on the racks with the rest of the magazines, as opposed to behind the counter at BN, sometimes I'd have to clean the wall. Turns out a mop made about $7 an hour in 1998. Story 57. In home sales, I've come across many women that wanted something more than what they originally I quoted for. I had a girlfriend, now wife, so I never acted on any. One involved a swing in a room I was led into. Another was an older woman who loved to make hardcore close eye contact. A dozen other stories. If I was single, my past would have been much different. Story 58. Startup in the mid-90s. A guy was using our servers to host an adult website. Stars included himself and one of our sales staff. I discovered it when one of our servers crashed and needed to restore from backup tapes. Story 59. It could go badly here. Guy with a blonde passenger passes me, slows down, passes me, slows down, passes me, slows down, passes me, rolls his Cherokee several times, and he loses something important in the accident along with both of their lives. Different industry. Someone bypasses lockout safety measures, and someone activates thrust reversers while someone is inside working on them. They didn't last long enough for the safety team, much less the EMS. Story 60. I let an older coworker trick me into showing him my junk. He just called me bluff. To my resentment, he grabbed it. I slapped his hand and put it away. I was so weirded out. He was happily married for 40 plus years. We always had really good banter. I guess he was just grooming me. I should have reported him. Story 61. I work in security. Years ago, I worked in a building for ex-cons and ex-vagrants and so forth. They had a curfew, but this one woman used to trick out of her apartment all night. She would pay me to look the other way while she brought Johns in all night. One night, I made $300 off of her. She was cool and never caused me any trouble. Story 62. Once a boss of mine asked me to make a backup of his computer on an external hard drive. Of course, I looked through everything until I found photos of his secretary on my desk at work where they had my things. That's why I smelled ass on my keyboard. Do you want to cheat on your wife with a married secretary? Do it, just not on my keyboard. Story 63. I worked at a well-known fish taco place in SoCal. There was a young mid-20s couple that would come in regularly. Once I noticed neither of them were at their table with their food. I went and checked the men's room for cleanliness. A couple minutes later, I saw both of them come out of the bathroom corridor together. He had not been in the men's room. Story 64. Back in 2008, a buddy of mine both worked at a company doing tech support. We were all required to rotate out and do third shift for a month, which we were put on together as it required 2 people to be on shift during that time. We rarely got any calls during this shift, so we decided to each take substances one night. Sure made the night go by quickly. Story 65. This happened way back when I was still working in a hospital. I went to the ER for some inquiries. However, a patient F was on a stretcher covered with curtains. Nervous breakdown, they say, after being dumped by her BF. She was moaning loudly and with all the dirty talks. It lasted for a few minutes until she came. Story 66. Worked at an IT-ish computer repair store, and an older guy working there spent all day in the back part of the store, backing up DVDs to an external hard drive while watching adult film openly on the computer with the volume up. The weirdest part was it wasn't sexual. It was just like something to watch for him. Story 67. As a help desk intern, I got a call about a software like Photoshop not working. I was far too sleepy to pay attention, but the pictures previewed on the main page wasn't completely about their job. I wouldn't have even noticed until they screamed in surprise, inadvertently waking me up for good this time. This was during my first 30 days at that job. Story 68. I made a bet with a coworker, a Yankees fan, that the Red Sox would come back and win. From being down 0-3, she was so confident I would lose. She said anything goes. Well, it did in my office after the store closed. Every time I see a video or documentary about it, instantly takes me back. Story 69. I've started having sex with a super hot coworker everywhere at the office. We found out we're very into each other and we're equally filthy, and we have turned each other's life into a movie. We can't stop ducking everywhere. The meeting rooms, the kitchen, elevator, garage. I know this sounds ducking crazy, but it's what it is. Story 70. When I worked in a lumberyard, one specific driver liked to moon people. Also, the warehouse manager had somehow seen every one of his employees' balls by accident and one salesman. Story 71, 2013 JRTC rotation. I opened a port at John to see a girl from the medics riding the hell out of my comms guy. They let out a collective scream with my RO, saying, "We got married before the rotation." I just say congrats and let them do their thing. Story 72. I once had my boss show me a picture of her tits out of the blue to get my opinion on them. She wanted to send them to her online boyfriend. She was an older and bigger woman. It definitely was a shock to be in a dish pit washing dishes and then a phone shoved in my face. Story 73. I swung by the office pretty late one night to pick up my sunglasses that I left there. I was working remote the next day. I walked by our co-oo's office and saw her computer was still on, and there was a sex toy on her desk, the side of my forearm. I got out of there real fast. Story 74. I work in RV, and we had to fire a GM at one of our locations because he was ducking a customer's wife in an RV on the lot. The couple was cool with filming it until they got a divorce, and the guy sent the video to the CEO. Wild. Story 75. Back in the 80s, I worked overnights at a Dallas 7-Eleven. At some point, it got out that I would give free Slurpee drinks if you filled it up while topless. One late night, I had 7 topless patrons in the store at once. I had to stop before it got me in real trouble. Story 76. When I worked at Sports Direct, people would routinely crap on clothes in the changing room. At Toys R Us, one of my colleagues walked past me while I was with a customer and said, "Ew, you are standing like an idiot." When I worked at Microsoft, I found a used in the men's toilets. Story 77. There was a copier room at my old workplace. No one ever went in there, but I'm in it, so we kept it as storage. I walked in on 2 coworkers who are married, not to each other, BDW, kissing each other. I grabbed what I needed, said hi, and left. Story 78. I worked in fast food, and I was in the walk-in freezer when a girl I worked with walked in and rubbed on me, then turned around and grabbed a handful of it. It wasn't consented, but I didn't care back then. I was a horn. Story 79. Quite a few. I once left my married older boss duck me so I could have a weekend off. I also once had sex with a coworker in the break room right after closing. Left a customer duck me in the bathroom. Story 80. I was working a crap janitorial job for a pharmaceutical manufacturer and was duck my boyfriend in a janitor closet. Some Karen walked in and caught us. What she was doing there at 9 p.m. or what she was doing in my janitor closet, I'll never know. But yeah, I bet she knocked next time. Story 81. My boss asked me to come upstairs with her to help fetch some towels for the restaurant I worked at washing dishes. We go up the elevator and into the laundry room, close the door behind us, and we start duck. We're getting engaged soon. Story 82. It wasn't dangerous, but I was working retail and standing on a go-bag cart stocking the top shelf. We would surf our way down the aisle. Loss prevention saw me and said OSHA wouldn't approve of that, and walked away. It's now something I say in everyday life. Story 83. Third shift in a factory. Walked into a foreman's office on a line that wasn't running on third to get something I was sent for. They are duck. He just looked back at me and said to close the door on my way out. Story 84. Dude lost his foot in a trash compactor because Einstein decided to use his foot to stomp down boxes and stuff. Master tier safety man. Didn't have protective rails to prevent this kind of gittery, and his shoe ended up getting stuck. Story 85. I had an affair with a coworker a few years ago. We fooled around a fair bit while we worked on projects together, but one day we both went in, not realizing it was a holiday. This crazy Karen told me we should have sex on the conference room. Story 86. A college-aged coworker's swimsuit became see-through when she swam at a company picnic. She didn't care that I saw that she wasn't a real blonde. 2. On a business trip, 2 coworkers, both in their 50s, used the jacuzzi in my suite, then my king bed. Story 87. This one manager at a previous job showed me a picture of a girl on his phone. I can't remember why, but it was a nice, so I'm not complaining. And I had the hots for him anyway, so it was pleasant at the time. Story 88. A female salesperson was a little alternative. This was back in the aughts. Lots of piercings and visible tattoos. One day she came into the work area. Someone asked her about her piercing. She offered to show us a couple more that weren't normally on display. Story 89. Had a patient on our unit once who injected Cialis directly inside. Lasted more than 4 hours, came to hospital, then the ducker refused to keep his door closed, just laying in bed in a hospital gown. Up Periscope. Story 90. I've worked in restaurants for 25 years, mostly without non-slip shoes. I'm not against non-slip shoes, but every time I get they're horribly uncomfortable. I'm a Crocs man. The standard Crocs aren't non-slip. I switched to the non-slip bistro Crocs and they're awful. Story 91. I had sex in the office with a coworker some years back. I got caught with my hand up another coworker's skirt, but the manager said nothing as he just walked by my workstation. This was long ago but well remembered. Story 92. I work security at a hospital. My second week I was in the ER and my supervisor walks over to me and casually says, "Go tell the girlfriend of the patient in room 3 to stop do BJ him." Story 93. My boss was trying to move a pack of lumber with a forklift, but the lift was threatening to tip forward. He had me hang onto the back as he moved it. I only found out later how dangerous that was. Story 94. A dude without forklift training high, racing a forklift around the IKEA warehouse with customers present, dressed as Fred Flintstone. It was Halloween. Screaming "Yabba dabba doo" at the top of his lungs. Yeah, he was fired in the spot. Story 95. A girl who couldn't hold her liquor took her top off and started dancing on a table at a work gathering at a nearby bar. She was up, topless, and dancing before anyone could intervene. She left the company soon after. Story 96. A coworker and I thought the other was cute, so we decided to duck in his car after we clocked out a few times and simply never spoke about it to anyone else. We worked together for 3 years doing this. What was the most NSFW thing you have ever seen at work? I used to work in a movie theater in the summer, and after a movie, I go in and collect all the popcorn bags and stuff. Saw a fat blob all over the back of a seat and a wet female underwear in between the seats. Story 2. I've seen, and this is 100% truth, a bathroom stall floor covered in full-page color of some chick, with sprayed all over them. Story 3. My work is tech support, and sometimes we need to access the devices to fix the problem. Please put all your pick on a specific folder or close all your tabs before giving the permission. I have seen a lot. Story 4. A picture of a coworker's naked that was heavily bruised after a spanking session. Never not a NSFW conversation with her. Can't wait to hear her latest update. Haven't been to work in 4 days. Story 5. I worked briefly at a sauna, so a guy getting fisted. He was very polite and brought his own towels to lay out underneath him, but damn, I don't know how he walked out after. Story 6. Probably myself in the work bathroom mirror as I do substances of a dirty key and wondering when TF I was going to finally go to rehab. I am sober now. Story 7. 2 colleagues were having an affair. Let's call them Bobby and Susie. Bobby's wife found text messages, took screenshots, and sent them to Susie's husband. Susie's husband comes storming into our office yelling, "Where's the guy who's been ducking my wife?" Chaos ensues. Story 8. Some guy, a customer I actually liked, but not like that, showed me a junk pic. I wasn't mad, just disappointed. I told him that's the kind of thing that could put him on a list that says he can't live near for the rest of his life. I really don't think he realized it was inappropriate until I told him. Story 9. A new employee's second day, he was sat in the cubicle across from mine that shared a connecting wall. His first day was pretty chill, mostly shadowing me for half a day so he could get a day in the life sort of feel. The second day, the owner of the company gave him documentation to fill out. Basic things like direct deposit forms, emergency contact forms, NDA, non-compete paperwork, etc. At 8:00, I told him to get settled in and start working on them. At 9, I noticed it was quiet over there, so I walked around to check on him. He was staring at 3 blank monitors. I asked him what he was doing, and he said he had to restart his computer. I didn't think much of it at the time, and I just shrugged it off and went back to my desk. About half an hour later, a different coworker who was passing by called me over. Apparently, this dude had been staring at blank monitors, completely motionless the entire time, since 8. The computer was on, but was just asleep. He never logged in, and the paperwork was still in front of him untouched. At this point, he was completely unresponsive. He was not reacting to verbal stimuli, and when we turned him around in his chair, he looked as though he was getting confused in slow motion. He didn't have his emergency contact info written down yet, but I had remembered he mentioned living with his mom. His phone was on his desk, so I picked it up, but it was passcode protected without facial or fingerprint, so I could not unlock it. I asked Siri to call the last person that called me, and thankfully she started calling the contact Mom. She said she had never seen or heard of this behavior before, and to call 911. It It was about this time we had seen that he had taken out a notebook and some other paperwork when he had first arrived, and the top sheet was paperwork from the hospital that he had checked himself in for confusion the night before. We were afraid of violating privacy laws, so we didn't touch it for more details other than what we could see on the top page, and we asked his mother about it, to which she also didn't know he had done that. We called the paramedics and the police came. They ran all sorts of substances assays on him, which all came back negative, so they were going to take him to the hospital for further tests, at which point he clearly stated, "I don't want to go." It was the first time we had heard him speak since he got to work about 2 hours previously. They tried to communicate with him for over an hour to convince him to go, but he remained either unable or unwilling to communicate. Eventually, the paramedics deemed him not mentally in a state to make rational decision and ended up deciding that he needed to go to the hospital despite his protest, and consent was given by his mother. When they wheeled in the stretcher to put him on, he clamped his hands to his chair and started looking off into space, as if he could see something we couldn't, and started stringing along random words together that made no sense. They were worried he would become combative, so they gave him a small shot, which really didn't seem to have any effect other than him letting go of the chair. At that point, they asked him to sit on the stretcher, which he slowly complied with, albeit he was clearly out of it. It was like watching someone discover how to sit down for the first time. They wheeled him out and put him in an ambulance, and that was the last time I would ever see him. His car remained parked in the parking lot for about 2 weeks, until it vanished one day. Nobody had heard from him since. Even my boss never received any follow-up despite trying to reach out to him. That was the first and only time we've had to call the paramedics for someone at work. Software developers. So that's the best not safe for work story I got, even if it's a little too literal. Story 10. A bunch of biosafety level 3, airborne, samples being handled with biosafety level 2 equipment and precautions, not airtight, on orders from the executive board. That particular project infected and sickened every single technician who worked on it, and eventually some of those samples escaped the lab, though the breach was eventually contained at no small financial cost before it affected the public. Story 11. I used to drive a truck, and some woman flashed me on the road, and that was pretty neato. I used to work at an arcade that closed at midnight, people having sex out back and topless laser tag. I used to work in a print center, and a woman gave me her thumb drive to print something. Her nudes were on the drive, and she didn't seem to care working jobs where I drive a lot. I've seen way too many dudes peeing in public story. Oh, there's been a few. Like the guy who knocked several whole pallets of glass milk bottles off the top shelf with a forklift. They were about 20 feet up. Had someone been under that, they would have been turned into hamburger from all the glass smashing. Or there was that time at McBananas when someone tried to grab a piece of jewelry out of the fry oil with their bare hand. It was a reflex action to catch it as it fell, but they sunk their hand wrist deep into the oil, then screamed, ran out, and we never saw them again. We ended up getting a whole new machine. Manager was looking for a reason to replace it anyway. But there was also this time at the log home place, where a guy was guiding a log being moved by the crane onto the home. Well, one of the hooks used to lift it, caught it after it was set down, and caused it to start rolling right at my coworker while he was on a ladder. I looked over just in time to see him jump off the ladder, and the log crushed it while he was still in the air. It was like a scene from a movie. Story 13. I worked for a university center while going to school. We would repair laptops for students if it was a simple fix for a small fee. One time a young woman came in with her laptop and told us it wasn't booting right. After a drive scan, we determined the hard drive was failing. We let her know, gave her a link to a new drive we suggested. The students would have to order the parts we put in, so we just charged a flat fee, and we would even transfer all the data we could recover to a folder on her new drive. She brings in the drive a few days later, and we tell her we'll call her when it's ready. So the next day, the weather was kind of bad, and nobody else I worked with was coming in. My boss told me I could stay home or come in if I wanted, since I lived close by. The center was going to be closed for walk-ins, so it would just be time to work on devices we already had, clean up. I said sure and went in thinking, why not? Easy money. So I went in and talked vibe with my boss for a while. Eventually, I thought I might as well get that girl's new drive and data recovery done. So I go through the usual process of setting up on the new drive. While that's going, I plug in the old drive to a dock and use a tool to pull off the data. A few bad sectors are being reported, so I figured there's probably going to be some stuff that we can't recover. Whatever, we already told her that might happen. So I start to just kind of see what was on her computer's desktop previously, since that's where she seemed to keep all her schoolwork. But there's one folder that's got a generic name of documents or something along those lines. I open it up, hot photos absolutely everywhere, like thousands, guessing she had only fans or something. I closed out of it real quick since my boss was sitting right across from me, and I briefly had something very FW on my screen. After finishing what data recovery I could, I marked it done and moved on. When she came to pick it up, I made sure I had something else to do, so one of my other coworkers would have to do the whole checkout and demonstration of our work thing because I don't think I could have dealt with that. I wanted absolutely no chance of her realizing I saw what I saw and potentially causing a scene. Story 14. When I was working retail, I walked into the women's bathroom and saw a man under the hand dryer with his pants stretched out so the air could hit his. I quickly apologized and left assuming I'd gone in the men's room. I worked loss prevention and had to check both bathrooms for empty packages or defeated sensors each shift. But nope, it was definitely women. I slowly went back in and he had a cheesy grin and asked in a thick accent, "Oh, is this the woman's?" I still doubt it was an accident. Story 15. Caught a coworker hit the dolphin. I strongly suspect he was on Met. I don't know who was more embarrassed, but that was the beginning of the end for him. Story 16. Used to deliver flowers in my small town for a part-time job in high school. My first day I went to 2 different funerals to drop off arrangements. Sometimes I would have to go in the chapel when nobody else was even there and pin flowers on the shirts of the deceased. It was a little strange, but I got used to it. Being in and out of the funeral homes frequently, I was able to catch a glimpse into the embalming rooms on a few occasions, sometimes with bodies on the table. The one that stuck out to me was a special needs girl, much younger than me, who passed due to her condition. Aside from funerals, we obviously delivered to individuals, parties, etc. It was not uncommon to take arrangements to hospitals either. I was working late one day trying to finish up the deliveries, and my last stop was the hospital to a lady in the extended care unit. I knocked on the door and announced who I was and why I was there, and the nurse said, "Come on in." Maybe she misunderstood who I was and why I was there, but when I walked in, I got a full view of every single inch of a lady while they were in the middle of either bathing her or changing her. The nurse gasped and I ran back out of the room as soon as I saw what was up. I waited by the door and she eventually let me back in and I dropped the flowers off and sped back to the shop to tell the owner. He thought it was hilarious, especially since it was his best friend's mom. Months later, I ended up delivering flowers to the same woman's funeral. I've only seen her twice in my life. Story 17. Not technically seen, but back in the Navy, I was on a submarine. In most of the boat, there are trapdoors in the floor so you can get underneath. Well, one time we're finishing up cleaning and I open up one of these doors and reach down while telling the guys who were cleaning down there that I'll take their cleaning supplies. What was placed in my hand was significantly warmer and softer than a brush or dustpan. Is that a junk? Yup, remove it or I'll squeeze. We had a good laugh after. Story 18. Worked at a wild restaurant as a busboy on the beach in Florida. I'd often work a shift like 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. and always be dealing with belligerently drunk humans. At 1 a.m., I decide to start cleaning the inside bathroom, where I find the married manager, Duck, the married bartender. I ended up having a meeting with my manager about how that could never be discussed and how I'd be the first busboy in history to get Employee of the Month. Story 19. I will remember both of these stories forever. First is funny, second one is dark. Both happened at the same restaurant where I worked. Once, someone came up to me to say there was a problem in the women's restroom. So I go in, check the first stall, nothing. The other stall is the handicap stall, and as soon as I open the door, from all the way across the stall, I see the fattest log of a crap sticking straight up out of the toilet, out of the water, way past the rim of the seat. It was like a baseball bat girth and half the length. One of our bussers had to go in and cut it up with a knife, poor guy. Second story. There was an aggravated, most likely homeless, man in the restaurant one night. The manager ended up calling the police. The cops came, chatted with him for a few minutes, and ultimately ended up tased him, and he passed. He screamed and cried and passed on the floor of the restaurant in front of me, coworkers, and families dining there that night. News report said he passed in the hospital due to heart difficulties. I know the truth. He deserved justice. Rip Alan Watts. I will always remember you. Story 20. I was visiting a site of another company. I do tech work at remote sites. I was at a utilities installation that hadn't been manned for decades. The building was pretty derelict inside, but it hosts critical national infrastructure. So the place is like one of those abandoned Chernobyl-type places urban explorers go around. I went to the toilet, an experience in itself, and on the back of the door was a page 3. In the UK in the past, and still today, on page 3 of some newspapers would be a girl. I thought nothing of it at first. Our line of work was, and still is, very much a man's world, so I just rolled my eyes and had a chuckle about the old days and had a closer look. I was on the toilet after all. I'm pleased to say that the industry is a lot more inclusive nowadays, and the company was horrified, and whilst reading those papers on site is only mildly frowned upon, sticking them up on toilet doors certainly doesn't fly anymore. Story 21. A Spanish customer asked if I could print her a copy of her resume in the office of the bar I ran. I said no problem, as long as I could virus scan the thumb drive. Her response was along the lines of, "Sure, there's nothing dirty on there." The thumb drive came back as virus-free, so I proceeded to open it. There were hundreds of hot photos. I found the resume, printed it off, and tried to say that perhaps she would be better using some folders, etc. The language barrier proved too great at the time, so her flatmate helped translate. Once it had been explained, she went a bit red and simply said, "You think hot?" I said, "Very." And she asked if she could wait behind after closing. Turned out to be one of the best years of my life. 6 months with Anna until she returned to Spain, and then 6 months with Maria before she too returned to Spain. Story 22. I was bouncer for 9 years. The craziest NSFW, professional style, I ever saw was insane. It was the end of the night. Lights were on, music was off, and we're ushering people out. Some girl was giving us "Chez tit," and a bartender, who was female and probably tipsy as duck, said something this other girl didn't like. The other girl couldn't go through a wall of bouncers, so she left, but through the huge glass windows of the bar, kept on yelling. So the bartender girl was like, "What you wanna go?" and flashed her boobs while charging the window. So the other girl flashed her boobs too, like, "Duck you beam." This went on for a minute, just boobs flashing back and forth. So meanwhile, we bouncers were all watching this absolutely speechless. Then this guy we called State Farm Stan, because he worked at State Farm for his day job, said one of the funniest things I've ever heard. "Yo, is this how chicks battle?" I was dying. Story 23. Marines hit each other by accident. I never witnessed it firsthand, but during my first 6-month deployment to Okinawa, 2 Marines were passed by one M60 round fired by an armorer for his safety. On New Year's Day, a captain insisted on taking his company to a live fire and maneuver range. Someone was hit by M60 fire. At 29 Palms, I saw an artillery shell explode uncomfortably close to a tank. My 4-man machine gun team was almost blown by a Bangalore torpedo at 29 Palms during an assault on an elevated position. It was a live fire combined arms thing, just chaos. So loud you couldn't hear anyone. There was a 50 cal firing over our head. The 4 of us were making our way along some barbed wire fairly well spread out. Something caught my eye to my right, a bit below us. It was another Marine, gesturing frantically and screaming. I got it, and we made it under a very shallow embankment when, boom, you could hear the barbed wire whizzing through the air. During that same trip to 29 Palms, a Marine from my platoon dialed a mortar in backwards, not the right term, and fired a mortar back over his squad's heads. Nobody was hurt. This is a sampling. Story 24. I worked clothing retail, and a woman opted to try on her clothes behind a rack on the sales floor instead of using the fitting rooms. Oh, and the time a guy took a dump in the fitting room, and the time duck in a fitting room in our tiny store. They spent $8,000, so I was cool. Story 25. A woman backed up on her boyfriend's hand getting FB at a Halloween party. She was in a bunny suit, so self-explanatory. I worked at a casino. Also, 50-somethings do it on in women's bathroom. The slapping sound still haunts me. Story 26. When I worked at Tim Hortons, a customer came out of the men's washroom and told me there's something disgusting in the men's washroom. I was thinking it was poop smeared all over the toilet or something, but it was so much worse. On the counter, next to the sink, was a pair of panties covered in, and the way they were sprawled out on the counter made it look like whoever did it wanted to display them for everyone to see. Of course, being the only man on shift at the time, I was the one who had to clean it up. That incident still haunts me. Story 27. Years and years ago, I sold cars for a medium-sized new car dealership. The person who came out to do paperwork with customers was a super attractive young lady at probably early 20s, which was my age at the time. One day I was driving a new SUV around the lot, and she asked for a quick ride to the sales building for the other brand we carried. No problem. She hopped in and I took her over. When she came back out to go back to the other building and went to climb in, the wind caught her skirt and blew it up to the point that there were 0 secrets. She was wearing underwear, but barely. I saw. She knew I saw. I don't remember what was said, but it must have completely diffused the situation because it was never awkward. We laughed it off. Story 28. Worked at a J.C. Penney's. One Black Friday, I was helping this woman pick out some shoes. She seemed nice and normal, but she was wearing a really, really short sweater dress. Whatever, wear what you want. No business of mine. During the conversation, it came out that she was also getting her family Christmas cards done that day in our photo center. She left happy and went to her session. About 5 minutes later, she goes to me and asks me if we have a lingerie section. I try to point to where it is, but she wants me to physically walk her over. Fine, it's the end of the afternoon and we're no longer busy, so I take her. She then asks to see the clearance section. She then grabs a pair of panties out of the bin, says, "Cover me," and slips them on, tossing me the tag and asking me to ring her up. Found out later that our photographer insisted she go buy some underwear because she kept flashing her during her family session. Story 29. Worked at a garbage gas station in Iowa called The Brew. Worked in their kitchen. How they haven't been shut down is insane. Floors were black, coated with ½ an inch of grease, spoiled chicken in the fridges. Chicken being kept with other foods in open and uncleaned containers, as well as in the drink coolers. It was just a mess. My first day, let me emphasize first day, the cook who trained me tried serving green brisket. She later told me as I was scrubbing grease out of the sink and back wall behind it that I'd never be able to clean the place up. And like the weirdo perfectionist I am, I tried my best to prove them wrong. Scraping and scrubbing, stock rotation, etc. Didn't do anything. Manager didn't care and hired dealers and all sorts of wonderful people. Dealer who was hired before I quit came in on his first day with a stab wound from being jumped, and he was cooking chicken for only 5 minutes because they didn't put anyone on shift to train him. I don't even understand why I thought I could fix it. Quit and just reported it to OSHA. Story 30, head chef, 45, M, married, put a cloth over the security camera of the prep room. Proceeded to do substances with the front of house manger and then duck her on the prep table. I walked in by accident. The next day there was still substances on the table. They had not cleaned it after. I Karened the dude out the next day as he had been leaving early every shift, leaving me to work late while he literally ducked around. He'd been botching at me for not working harder. Dude shoved me against a wall hard. I quit on the spot. On my way out, I told the owner to go duck himself, and I quit loud enough for everyone in the restaurant to hear me. He had been speaking with several customers at the time. Flash forward 8 years, and the place is now in a class action lawsuit over the owner stealing wages and being a substances front for a dealer. Story 31. High school, working for a grocery store. Someone wrecked the restroom. Graffiti, all the toilets clogged and flooded, crap and piss everywhere. Being the low man on the totem pole, as well as the guy who less than an hour prior got written up for a customer complaint. I put the bread in a bag on top of the eggs, and when I put that bag into the trunk of the car, I put the case of beer right on top of that bag and then closed the trunk. So I was told to go up and clean that restroom. When I saw what it was, I told them that I was going to need help. They told me no. I went back, thought for a moment, and decided that minimum wage was not enough for this and quit. My dad was angry I did that. He asked what was I going to do next. I said, I was making minimum wage, so it's not like I will get a lower paying job. Story 32. A drunk so-called manager at a Christmas party, grabbing literally every colleague. Even guys from top management were. Still haunts me. Story 33. I worked as a cabana server at one of the big resort pools on the Vegas Strip, and I'd walk in on people ducking at least once every couple months. It was even a prank we all had going where we'd send the shy server to go run something to one of the cabanas, and then she'd always come back beat red and embarrassed, but was a really good sport about it, and we all adored her, so it wasn't mean-spirited. Story 34. Manager got caught. Fallout. His firing and divorce from his wife. The woman got to keep her job but quit. The company paid a settlement to a harassment lawsuit as his behavior, and 4 others had been reported several times, and HR failed them. Story 35. About 10 years ago, I dated a girl that I worked with at a certain big box department store. I, in the back room, she, up front. One day, on a day we happened to be working together, she gave me a BJ to completion in the walk-in dairy cooler. She came back, saw me walk in, came in behind me, and just started making out with me. Story 36. I used to work in a restaurant that had a private party room upstairs, which was rented out for a bachelor one Saturday night. They hired a couple of escort, and one of them chatted with me before the party began, and she told me it was her first private party like this, so she was a little nervous. Once the party began, she was really flirtatious and dancing with the men, all the while doing many shots with them, I guess to feel more at ease. Anyway, at one point, she's in the middle of the room doing a provocative solo dance, and I'm not really watching, but suddenly I notice the room has become very quiet. I turn around to see what's going on, and she's vomiting a freaking river all over the place, and all the men are just stunned with disgusted looks on their faces. It was such a depressing and mortifying scene. Truly awful. Story 37. One of the last nights I was a bartender years ago, I worked with this girl who was notoriously a little escorty. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but that's just how she was. As she went to leave, she goes, "Oh, hey, it's your last night, right?" Then proceeds to show me a video she took of herself by some random guy she met at a club the night before. Story 38. I was working at a very high-end resort waiting tables, and my girlfriend was a housekeeper in the lodge. We met at the resort only after being there for a couple days. She didn't particularly care for her job and was there to work during the summer break between college sessions just like me. After the morning breakfast rush, I would take some food to her in one of the rooms she was cleaning. This almost always lead to some quick, sexy time. One morning, I was taking some food to her and saw her puking in the hallway outside of the room she was cleaning. I ran to her and asked her what was wrong. She pointed to the room, gasping, "Crap, every ducking where?" I looked in the room and there was literally crap smeared everywhere. That's about the time I started puking in the hallway beside her. It's the most disgusting thing I'd ever seen and smelled. Story 39. Naughty by nature signing a server's tits. And while I didn't see what happened, she went to their hotel room after her shift. I've partied with her before, and she is pretty free-spirited. I worked at a hotel, saw a few past guys, met lab, sex in conference rooms, plenty of fights. And while not NSFW, there was a Down syndrome convention, and at the end of conference party, Corky from Life Goes On was a surprise guest. The crowd went wild. It was amazing and so much fun. The staff, including me, danced with the attendees, and it was the most fun and loving and just amazing time. It was like 20 years ago, and I'm still chasing that high. Story 40? Not me, but my coworker walled into an office area of the building we work in and definitely saw a couple duck hard in one of the meeting rooms. He saw her later that night and told her he could hear her applause. I'm told she got very embarrassed. Story 41. Well had a winter storm in 2022 and was forced to work when 99% of the town was shut down. I was literally the only employee working. The rest were literally drunk and smoking. This literally consisted of Big Boss, 4 managers, and 1 other crew member. I was running the drive-through grill. I had no clue WTF I was doing. I had no training. Fryers, making sandwiches and stuff myself, was the only one closing down too. Big Boss was there and new and drinking on the job too. 2 managers had sex in the walk-in cooler, bathrooms, and the manager's office where everyone could see them. One of managers, she's married and had a GF who he was trying to get pregnant. So yeah, duck Wendy's. Story 42. Didn't see it in action, but was there when my coworker realized that the overnight janitor was using her computer to crank his adult film different job, but some guy was ducking a married coworker and got knocked out by hubby in the parking lot. Story 43. A guy pulling a balancing act while standing on a small plastic chair and filming herself on mobile. But if you're looking for the other answer, probably the incident when I attempted to assist someone in printing their files and suggested they use Google Drive to access it. Ended up with a lovely view under recently viewed images. I got the feeling it was probably as unexpected for the customer as for myself, but even so. Story 44. Owner of restaurant had a loaded gun. No safety, no holster, out pointed towards where I worked in the kitchen. No obstructions, just an unattended gun pointed toward me making pizza. Story 45. Worked in it at a hospital. Adult film usually, from DARs to the normal working types in different roles. The most NSFW thing would have been the guy that ultimately was arrested, and obviously fired, working in the social services department with this all over his computer, and would sometimes walk away from his desk without locking his computer, which was already a no-no at the hospital if you were doing more than just walking to a printer or something along those lines, and have images still visible on his monitor. Story 46. A coworker did not get along with our manager, Tina. He decided one day to send a message. He hit his hand and wrote, "Go Tina go," on the bathroom wall, and then just went back to work like it was a regular day. He of course got fired when someone else found his little art piece. Story 47. I used to work in downtown LA, and we had a window that overlooked an alleyway. You'd see some crap pretty much every day, including literal crafting, but also a lot of substances used, etc. Homeless, gonna homeless. Story 48. I used to do satellite TV installation. My boss warned me that sometimes we get jobs at the homes of wealthy single women who were weirdly comfortable with their lack of clothing around us. I wasn't prepared for a 5'9" gal who thought it was fun to wander her house in sheer lingerie. Story 49. My GF at the time and I worked together at some small local retail store. Sometimes on lunch breaks, we'd go sit in my truck and I'd cane. Simpler times. Story 50. I work in landscaping. One of the companies I worked for was awful about safety. I saw a wood chipper where the machine part was only held to the trailer by tree guying cord instead of the unbolts that it was designed to use. Same company, pruning some 20-ish foot tall foster hollies. I check on a crew that had tied an extension ladder to a 12-turn frame ladder in an attempt to shear the top of the tree. They were already finished when I got there, but I tried to explain why it was a bad idea. Story 51. Worked at an inkjet poster printing place when it was new. We had one printer set up at the main window so that people could watch it print. My coworker printed a photo he found on the early internet hot photo. Sure, it was at midnight, but this was on a main street in downtown Toronto. Story 52. Worked for a big company that did lots of business in China. China is known for fake products, excellent copies of name brands that aren't really that brand. I watched several executives buy entire sets of fake Callaway golf clubs at 10% of retail price, take them through customs as their personal property, then sell them in the US on Craigslist as real Callaway golf club sets full price, never used. They would do this time after time, trip after trip. Story 53. Worked at Subway. And we shared a basement with the nail salon next door. One day went down to grab some stuff from the freezer and heard pleasure noises from a side room. It didn't belong to either particular storefront. It didn't even have a door. I walked over to opening and looked in, and sure as crap, the owner of the nail salon was going to town on one of the nail techs. Neither saw me, and I didn't want to ruin their fun. so I just walked away. Story 54. I was working security in a hospital one time when the leader of a gang affiliated. The police only hung around long enough to get a statement and took off. I called my supervisor saying we had no police presence in the hospital. And if the rival gang finds out that guy is still alive, all they have to do is walk in the front door and finish him. Story 55. On my first day of a new job at a law office, my boss gave me a USB to access some files for my first case. It was a small business of just my boss and her legal assistant before I was hired on, so I guess she didn't worry too much about privacy. I plugged in the USB to my laptop and there was a folder labeled pictures that I assumed was evidence related to the case. Nope, they were her husband's junk pics. I never said a word. Story 56. Once I've worked on a shoe store as a stockist. One day I came to work and catch a salesman having sex with the store cashier. They didn't see me, so I just leave quietly the storeroom and let them finish. Never spoke a word to anybody in the store. Story 57. Had a line manager run past me with half a left hand, hit diagonally across the palm, in a Ziploc bag, followed by a guy with half a left hand, cut diagonally across the palm, being pushed along on a trolley screaming, followed by 4 maintenance guys a few hours later with a standsaw missing a safety guard. Regular day in a caravan factory. Story 58. Went to ask a coworker a question and walked up behind him in his cube, watching adult film. Just turned around and let him have his moment. Story 59. We had a lady get 3 fingers absolutely lost. Fingers of a big, heavy, fireproof office door while she was standing there chatting. Someone went by to close the door, not seeing her hand there, since their conversation was getting loud and, yeah, it was gruesome. Story 60. Owner's son used to pleasure himself in his cubicle, under the table portion. He'd weigh adult film on his phone all day, and a few times he got caught by not just myself, who had the cube next to his, but other higher-ups in the company. When they brought this to the attention of the owner, he said his son has an OCD concerning and we shouldn't hold it against him. Story 61, technically me. I used to work as a gatekeeper, and one day that I was about to finish the morning shift, my GF came to pick me up, went behind the desk with me, and spent the last 10 minutes do BJ. Story 62. I worked as a bank teller at the time. Lady said she needed to close her joint accounts. Her husband had been cheating on her, and she was showing everyone his junk. On the bright side, I now work for a larger online bank and we get sent pics and nudes all the time as forms of ID. Story 63. When I was 18, I got my first job at a call center. My first day, I stepped into the bathroom and I saw a girl do substances from the sink. She realized I was there, looked at me, grabbed some substances on her nail and offered it to me. I declined politely, and then she asked if I was a weed she could also share. Story 64. Worked at an Olive Garden as a line cook. One of the customers called his server idiot, and she came back into the kitchen crying her eyes out. All the cooks decided to contribute to this man's meal, but the worst one pissed in the sauté pan and cooked his shrimp scampi in it. I'll never forget such a horrendous smell as long as I live. Story 65. Grocery store. Busiest time of day, met head lady bursts her leg abscess in the middle of the store. She walks around too high to notice for 2 minutes. Black and dark red blood was all over the store. We finally notice and get her to sit down and tourniquet her leg. She probably passed right after refusing actually medical treatment. Story 66. Walked into the bathroom for a cleanliness check, only to find a big black sex toy standing proudly in the toilet bowl, absolutely caked in crap. I've never been so happy to not have finished my dangerous chemicals training. Story 67. Fresh pasta place, where they make the noodles right in front of you. Girl working the pasta machine was talking to a customer and stuck her arm a little too far into the extruder. Absolutely mangled the duck out of her arm like I thought she was gonna lose it. Turned the pasta red. Story 68. Walked in on my faculty colleague in his office late one evening with a woman. I stayed in my office next to his until she was done with her tutoring to make sure nothing untoward was happening. Story 69. I was copied on an email where one of the bosses typed "put it inside" to a client. Either he was responding to the wrong person or his phone auto-corrected what he was trying to type. I can't remember what he was trying to type, but the context made sense that it could be autocorrect. Let's just say he lost their business. Story 70. I hear awful comments every day at work. Even without saying anything, facial expression or laughter earns being threatened or told, if you don't like it, go work somewhere else. Witness daily substances used at work, and while I have not personally witnessed at current job, hear about workers escort themselves and dealing substances. Story 71. I saw my ex-boss duck with other coworker. It was 10 p.m. and no one was supposed to be in the office besides me. The door wasn't closed, just slightly ajar. She seemed to be degrading him at the same time. I asked HR for a transfer the next day and took a week off. Story 72. I saw this one les couple saunter into the lobby and they beelined to the can. A few moments later, I heard a couple of heavy thumps against the wall. About 10 minutes later, they came out totally disheveled and wished us well as they left. I never forgot it. Story 73. There's a load of sharp metal where I work. Someone once dropped a blade on their foot. For reference, they'd give those blades the old "does it slice paper with no pressure" test. The blade passed that test. It slid off the steel toe back toward him and really hit it. Story 74. Had a Romany lady come in wanting to print some pics for her man in photo. The whole time she's flirting with me, and at some point, her tit pops out from under her bra, tank, and sweater, and then she asks if there's any deals on photos. That was it. That was the NSW Story 75. I work in an ER. Make sure your metal junk rings have a release mechanism, lads, so urology doesn't have to chop it off with a huge bolt cutter. The ring. Chop off the ring. Anyway, how's y'all's Tuesday morning? Story 76. As a blue-collared worker, it's not about what you've seen, but the things you've heard. The most perverted and/or gruesome crap you'll ever hear. A lot of it's not true, but holy crap, it's the wildest stuff I've ever heard. What is an NSFW experience that you are not very proud of? Story 1. When I was in 4th grade, I went to Ireland on vacation to visit my grandparents. I grew up in the Boston area, so I wasn't really well versed in how farms work. But my grandparents owned a farm in County Mayo, Ireland. Anyway, one day I was playing hide and seek with some kids in my grandparents' neighborhood, and I found this giant mound of earth behind the barn. It seemed that a kid could fit himself between the mound and the side of the barn and be concealed fairly well. So I started to climb the mound. When I got to the very top, the crust broke and I began to sink. Unfortunately, I took a bit too long to realize what was happening, but before I knew it, I was stuck up to my knees in cow manure. I desperately scrambled to get myself out, but that only made things worse, and by the time all of the kids who were playing hide and seek converged onto my location, I was stuck up to my waist. The look the local kids gave me was just soul-crushing. I finally got myself out and I was 3/4 of the way covered in cow crap. I walked back to my grandparents' house, while the neighborhood kids followed from a considerable distance. Someone apparently ran ahead and told my mother, so she was waiting in the front yard when I got there. I'll never forget the look of disgust on her face. She hosed me off in the front yard while the neighborhood kids watched from the sidewalk. I can only imagine what those local Irish kids thought of American kids after that. Story 2. One night stand with a larger woman. She says I'm too big to be thrown around, so to show it wasn't a big deal, I throw her onto the bed, it breaks and injures the cat underneath. Story 3. Duck in a tent with a family friend while both of our sisters were sleeping next to us. I was drunk, but I've never been so ashamed as the morning after when my sister said she heard us. Story 4. The time I made out with my neighbors, and when she said she wanted to duck, I was like, word, lasted about 5 seconds and said, we shouldn't do this, and left. She was really upset, and we didn't talk for a long time. Some years later, we hooked up again, and I bailed that time too before anything happened, but she was ready to go. Basically, I'm an idiot who completely fumbled a friend with benefits opportunity. Story 5. I once went out with a friend, and we had a good drinking session. On our way back home, we came across this expensive car. We both made jokes about materialistic a-holes, and I said, bro, crap on this goddamn car. Well, he did. He literally climbed on top of the hood, pulled his trousers down, and dropped a massive dump on that car. Story 6. Pleasure a girl while in the backseat of a car. We were on a road trip to the Rockies to go skiing. The car was packed, and we were jammed in the back. At some point at night, while most of the car was asleep, she moved my hand to her thigh and covered it with her jacket. So, being a horny, I figured out what she wanted and started to do what I could. There were 4 of us jammed in the back and somehow managed to make it work. I guess part of the thrill for her was the thought of getting caught because her boyfriend and soon-to-be ex was the one driving. When she finished, and she crushed my hand between her thighs and shuddered a little, then leant over, kissed my ear, and whispered thanks before falling asleep. I was left to extract my damp hand and think about what I just did. Story 7. GF now wife ducked in the shower so hard and long when we first got together. When we finished, I completely blacked out and woke up on the ground, spent 2 days in there. Story 8. In the very early days of online dating, I started chatting with this girl that wasn't far from me, and she was very, very keen to get some that day. She was same age as me. I drive over to her house and something just feels off about her. I'm fairly average looking, but this girl is a smoke show. I'm talking like a 12-10, like Playmate of the Year material. Anyway, she's really all over me, and we do the deed, but afterwards she starts saying some really weird and out-of-pocket stuff. Nothing particularly scary, but enough stuff that just doesn't fit the context that starts setting off serious alarm bells in my head. As I'm leaving, her dad pulls up and asks what I'm doing in his house. At first, I was super freaked the duck out because I thought she might have lied about her age or something, so I tried a jet, but the dad just looked sad and basically said, "No, man, you're not going to jail or anything. I'm just glad you're not hurt." Turns out the daughter is very, very schizophrenic as a result. I chatted with him for a minute, and he basically said he has to keep her at home now. because she's been removed from every facility she's been sent to because of her tendency to literally duck anything. Every single facility, orderlies, other patients. The poor guy just looked so defeated. Her mom disowned her since she would duck every single guy her mom tried to get into a relationship with. Story 9. My GF asked me for ages to have a group sex with her best friend. I really didn't like the girl, but eventually I agreed because I was sick of being badgered. On the day, about 10 minutes in, I finally kissed her friend and got a bit handsy, when all of a sudden my GF says, "Well, you two seem to be fine, I'm out." I asked her what that meant, and it turned out the two of them had conspired. My GF wanted out of the relationship, and they decided that I would just get handed over. This was really upsetting, obviously, and for some reason I thought the best plan was to spend the entire weekend ducking her best friend in our bed. I have never been a great lover, but I swear I was the best ever that weekend. I gave her everything that I had and more. I was literally exhausted on Monday morning, and instead of going to work, I went and found a room, grabbed a very few things that I cared about from the house, transferred 2x what I owed her for bills, etc., just to be sure, and walked out the door. I never spoke to either of them again, and I feel bad because I definitely used the friend to get back at my guff. Story 10. I had to sleep outside of the church in a box to raise money for the homeless because my CCD class chose that crap over something normal, like a day at a soup kitchen. Me and my friend are sharing a big fort by combining our boxes. It's getting late, and I want to get some sleep. He agrees, so we settle into our corners. That's when the dude starts jacking it under his blanket and says out loud to me, "Sorry, I need to do this to sleep." I straight up yelled at him to go into the woods nearby or jack it in the church bathroom they left open for us. He picked the church bathroom. Kind of fits the definition because it happened to me, and I'm not proud of it, but the story fits the prompt better if you consider the other person's perspective. Story 11. Duck with a single mom at community college years ago in her cluttered van. We went to Wawa together during lunch, and when we got back, she asked what we should do with the rest of our time. Thankfully, I used protection because it turned out she had an ST. Another person who hung out in the same area as us during breaks ducked with her but was not so wise/lucky. Even using a protection, I could still smell it when I used the bathroom for the rest of the day until I was able to shower vigorously at home that night. Story 12. I was biking north on the Pinellas County Trail on my way to my job. I worked a 96-hour shift, but that's another story. At the time, I need to pleasure or I was going to lose my mind. I found a little patch of woods next to a fence with graffiti on it. I pulled my pants down and went to town. I was literally right in the middle. I hear a male's voice say, "Not appropriate, dude." Apparently in the 2 minutes it took me to relieve my nasty-ass self, a random person came up and started painting over the graffiti. I simply zipped up, walked by, and said, "I'll be on my way now." I broke the sound barrier, pedaling the rest of the way to work. Story 13. My former best friend cheated on her boyfriend with me multiple times. I knew she was in a relationship. I knew it wasn't right, but I was so madly in love with her, and I wanted her so bad that I couldn't stop it when it happened. They eventually broke up, and we became pretty frequent friends with benefits for a few months. They get back together, the FWB stops, and eventually they break up again, and we go back to duck. We aren't friends anymore. Story 14. I was once pretty desperate. It had been 8-9 months, and called over a girl I had seen once or twice that I was not really interested in. Not really thinking I took some substances a bit before she came over and we put on a movie. I was in my own world and she started kissing me. We both got naked, but I was struggling to get it up. I assumed because I was both depressed and had taken substances, I asked her to help me out. She agreed. 3 seconds in, still soft, I came. I was so embarrassed. I cleaned myself up and sat down still naked. She was confused, so I admitted to taking substances. She wasn't upset, but we talked a little after and eventually she fell asleep. I was still rolling and could not sleep. So I woke her up, told her my mom just called and wanted to meet for breakfast. I walked her out and never called her again. I honestly still feel terrible about that. Story 15. I got drunk at a bar. We left at closing time. I had to pee. So I got out of my buddy's car, jumped on the hood of his car, and yelled at the crowd exiting the bar, "Look at me! I'm a fountain!" as I peed. Story 16. Probably back when I was in the military, conscription country. After the 6 first weeks as a recruit, you get promoted and assigned to specialization. Me and a female recruit from the same unit had been flirting quite a bit when on leave, and decided screw it, probably last time we're seeing each other, so we went for a run and found a spot to duck. Next day, a lieutenant walks in and hands me a stack of papers. Great, we got caught and are getting a punishment, 35 days of no leave, and having to explain in front of a military tribunal what we did and why it was wrong. Fine sucks, but fine. End of the same week, we find out we both got chosen for the same task, her as a regular and me as an under officer. I get sent off to officer training for 6 weeks, come back and find out which unit and room I'll be assigned to. Same woman, the only bunk available is the one above her, and now I'm her superior. Pretty much every staffy knows what happened and has their eyes on it. One time I was sitting as the unit's duty officer. Part of the responsibility was to make sure everyone going on evening leave had their uniform in tip-top shape. Ms. Recruit comes up, and she has her breast pockets slightly open, I tell her, and send her last in line. A sergeant behind me commented something along the lines of, "Thought you learnt from last time not to inspect her chest," quite loudly. If I gave her a specific task, some staffies would comment or question me. If I didn't pick her for a task, the same thing. If she came to ask me for clarification on something, there was scrutiny. The jokes never stopped. The staffies had their eyes on us constantly, all for maybe 30 minutes of sex and half the force in our pants when we were done. Luckily, she only served for 9 months while I did a year. However, the jokes just continued. By the time I got transferred to the reserve, quite a few were convinced I had slept with every woman in the unit story 17. Nigh weekend, my early 20s, met my buddy, his GF, and her friend. I never met before down in Philly. Her friend and I are hitting off, but I proceed to get brown out drunk, but we still ended up duck. I woke up next to her in the bed with a massive headache, still dizzy. I go into the bathroom and start to notice a strange kind of copper taste in my mouth, and I run my hands through my beard, and it's all matted, and I'm like rolling dried stuff in between my fingers. I'm thinking WTF, and I look in the mirror, and my face looks like one of those lions after they take down a gazelle in a David Attenborough documentary. I hurry back into the room and see the white sheets stained very, very red. Apparently, she had periods, and drunk as I was, I either did notice or didn't care, and earned those red wings. After dry heaving a bit in the shower, I was so grossed, disgusted, I just made up an excuse why I had to leave immediately and bounced. Never saw her again. Story 18. Ducked behind a couple trees by a McDonald's. I was in trouble with my family already for bouncing and not coming home for a few days, and I knew this would be my last bit of nookie for a while, so I called my ex. Didn't know where to duck, so I was like, well, the tree line should do. Story 19. I used to duck with my ex in the bathrooms. They didn't have gendered toilets anywhere on campus, just individual bathrooms anyone could go in, like at a petrol station or something. He was a cheater and a scumbag, and no one knew I was back with him. But my mother tracked my location, so I couldn't go to his house at all. After about 2-3 months of just texting and seeing each other in college, he texted me to meet him in one of the bathrooms, and we ducked there on the floor. It became kind of routine for a couple more months. Looking back, I don't know how anyone didn't find out. Story 20. I watched my friend couple duck. We were in our 20s and were staying in a hotel room together on a trip. I was single. Later in the night, we were all drunk, and she said something like, "I wish we had our own room so we could duck." To BF, not me. I was like, "It's cool, I'll watch." I was joking. Get back to the room, and she gets naked. Me and my friend were both like, And then she said something like, "I'm hot, right? And you said you wanted to watch." And so I watched. It was awkward. We are all still friends. They are married with kids. We don't talk about it. Story 21. I was a raging hormone who knew how to get to third base, but not the simplicity of fourth at that time. I flirted with every girl I could, trying to get some like an American Pie stand in. After a track meet, this one girl and I made out behind the bleachers. Anyway, I wasn't driving yet, so my mom picked me up. I hadn't washed my hands, so the smell of her on my hand filled the car. My mom coughed quietly and rolled all the windows down while I mumbled an apology about sweating so much from running. I'm sure she knew what the smell was, but we never spoke about it. She never picked me up from track again. Story 22. College girlfriend and I were having a group movie night in a friend's dorm. We were in another girl's bed and thought we were being sneaky. Unfortunately, we were not as quiet as we thought and were very much called out by our friends the next morning. Story 23. I was dating an outlaw motorcycle member at the time and was at the clubhouse when they had a shop owner there that refused to pay protection money. My BF came into the room and asked if I needed to poo, which I did. Not proud of it, I was affected by alcohol at the time. Story 24. Group sex. Seemed like a really good idea at the time and they were hot, but led to quite a bit of awkwardness later, especially when it got out. Story 25. I touched my ex-GF inside my father's car, while he and my brother were on the front seats. My father looked behind and saw my hand making wonders. I totally forget about this episode. Until today. Still cringe to story 26. I went to stay with my girlfriend at the time as friend's college house. Her friend's roommate was out of town, so my girlfriend and I used her room to sleep. We all went out one night and got fairly drunk. We all came back and almost immediately all went to bed. We were feeling frisky and thought to go at it, but trying to be mindful of the noise. Her roommate's bed was insanely noisy, but we didn't care in the heat of things. The next morning, I left to drive back home for work, and my girlfriend told me all of her friends heard everything. We split a couple weeks after that for different reasons, but every time I see her friends, there's a hint of awkwardness that is very tangible. Bonus. In my much younger years, my then girlfriend and I would sneak to a wooded area to shag. We thought we were hidden and alone. We would be loud and not think anything of it, until one day we were vigorously going at it, and had heard someone on a trail that we never knew was there. 15 yards away, they clearly heard us as they started laughing hysterically. We never went back. Story 27. I was volunteering at a food pantry with my ex. One thing led to another, and we ended up doing the dirty. Story 28. A graduation party of sorts at the end of the school year. A childhood female friend of mine was attending too. It was our first time drinking. We both were a little drunk, but still could function. We decided to go take a walk. It was almost pitch black outside, but the wind and temperature were perfect. She then wrapped her hand around mine and told me that when she was in elementary school, she had a crush on me. I panicked a little, and I truthfully said that I did too. Then she did this happy sound, IDK what word to use, and we walked silently. After the party, I got kind of scared since this was one of my first true encounters with a girl. And I'm ashamed to say this, but I started ghosting or ignoring her and all around being an a-hole to her. All because I was a coward. I constantly think of all the previous hints of her feelings prior to this confession and what could have been if I wasn't stupid, especially when now she at least dislikes me. Story 29. I was being ducked by my previous partner. All went well until that one moment where it caught me by surprise and I ended up farting. FYI, I had some Coca-Cola before doing it, so I guess that must have been the reason. I was so embarrassed that I ended up running into the washroom and hosing myself down with the bidet and would not come out despite his assurances that it was all right, LeMayo. And surprisingly, he was not turned off. Took me a while to get over it and be comfortable with myself. Story 30. When I was in college, I drove out to see my long-distance GF at University of Iowa for the weekend. She lived in a sorority and so had to sneak me in. But as soon as we got to her room, we went at it immediately. Midway through, she gasped. When she pulled it back to look, her hand had liquid crap on it. The smell was awful, and I gasped once I noticed what it was. Since I wasn't supposed to be there, she covered my mouth so I wouldn't be loud with her crap hand. I vomited almost immediately on her bed and floor, and the commotion got attention from some of the sorority sisters and the house mom who promptly made me leave. Had to drive right back to my school and sat for 3 hours in the car, processing what happened. She was hot though. 10 in 10 would again. Story 31. I matched with a woman on Hinge. She drives for Lyft and Uber. She ended up picking me up twice at the end of the night on 2 consecutive weekends, and I had sex with her in the back of her Prius with no protection. Then she dropped me off. Story 32. For things I actually border on shame about, I grew up with a very mentally unstable sub-sentences abusing sister, and one day she passed out in the hallway. I saw this and just stepped over her to go to my room, not thinking much of it. About 30 minutes later, an ambulance comes to our house. Turns out she passed out whilst talking to some kind of death hotline, and they were worried she'd head herself, so they sent an ambulance who took her away. My parents were like, well, crap. We gotta be there when she wakes up. Do you wanna come with us, Visser 47? And I was like, nah. You'll hold the fort. You go, be with her 07 as soon as they left. I got on Grindr and invited some guy and dude BJ. It was not worth it. Story 33. I drove through the downtown of my city to hook up with a chick while tripping major balls. Miraculously had no issues reaching her or getting home. I just remember having trouble because she put a blindfold on me. Story 34. Hooking up with a guy where we mutually decided that we are just best friends. It was all over all right, and it was nice most of the times, but especially the last time just cemented that we are way too different. We both admitted just doing so because we thought the other one wanted it that way, and because we both did not have anyone else screwing with us. Some things I will miss, but yeah, I'll take that friendship over that mess. Story 35. I had just gotten broken up with this girl I was head over heels for, so naturally I went out with the boys to grab a few drinks. Well, on this particular night, this lady approached us and began talking to us. I was drunk and sad, so I carried the conversation with her, which eventually led to her inviting me to her place right around the corner. Started to have sex, and when I began to lift her shirt, she stopped me. I asked if everything was okay, and she said she was missing one boob because of a previous diagnosis of breast cancer. Mind you, she told me this when I was already inside. I said, oh, it's no worries. Well, I couldn't keep it up after that. I blamed it on being drunk and gathered my things saying goodbye. Story 36. Ducked my ex in her mom's garage, while her Turkish or Middle Eastern neighbors were like less than 10 feet away. Through fence and garage wall, crammed townhouses, I could hear a small group speaking their language, probably talking sports or the upcoming cookout, while I duck. She was trying to be quiet, but some got out. I could hear them stop talking, likely because they heard El Mayo, but I was totally in my zone. But in hindsight, I think we should have just returned later.